The subcommittee will come to order. I want to welcome everybody today to our Work and Welfare Subcommittee titled Time's Running Out, Prosecuting Fraudsters for Stealing Billions in Unemployment Benefits from American Workers. I want to welcome our witnesses here today and thank you for traveling to be a part of this hearing. And I want to also welcome our new members to the subcommittee. A few of them are here. I want to welcome Rudy Yakum from Indiana, who's a new member of Ways and Means and the subcommittee, and Aaron Beam from Florida as a new member here too. And welcome back our old members. And he's not new to Ways and Means, but new to the subcommittee, Randy Feenstra from Iowa. Randy, welcome to the Subcommittee on Work and Welfare. As the returning chairman of the subcommittee, we have a unique opportunity to build on our past bipartisan work and look forward to working with all of you. My district that I cover is the 16th Congressional District, which covers much of central and northwestern part of Illinois. The purpose of today's hearing is to learn how Congress can hold fraudsters, how we can identify fraudsters and other criminal organizations accountable by extending the statute of limitation for CARES Act-related unemployment insurance fraud, which will expire on March 27th of 2025 without congressional action. The Ways and Means Committee has conducted considerable oversight since the UI program's weaknesses were exposed during the COVID-19 pandemic. In February of 2023, the committee held a hearing with the government witnesses from the GAO and the Pandemic Response Accountability Committee, who testified to problems with outdated state systems and weak online security that made the program vulnerable to fraud. Subsequently, in May of 2023, the House passed the Protecting Taxpayers and Victims of Unemployment Fraud Act. The bill would have extended the statute of limitations for an additional 5 years and incentivized states to go after fraud and recover funds. It also included program integrity reforms to stop the pay and chase model of benefit delivery. Unfortunately, those reforms fell short of becoming law, and congressional action is needed now more than ever. All told, for the unemployment insurance program alone, GAO has estimated between 100 and 135 billion was lost to fraud during the pandemic. That number is astounding. Even more concerning, the Department of Labor tells us that only 5 billion has thus far been recovered. Meanwhile, we know law enforcement agencies have thousands of cases currently pending. The Department of Justice has charged more than 600 criminal UI fraud cases with associated losses of over 300 million. As of January 28th of this year, DOJ has more than 1,600 criminal matters that remain open and uncharged. Without an extension of the statute of limitation, these instances of suspected pandemic UI fraud will go unpunished. First and foremost, we need to provide law enforcement with the tools and resources to hold fraudsters accountable while pursuing reforms that can stop this type of UI fraud from happening again. Congress must act to extend the statute of limitations. I hope that in the coming weeks, we can work together in a bipartisan fashion to pass legislation to do just that and get a bill across the finish line before the March 27th date. In addition, we need to examine how international crime rings and hostile nations continue to target the UI program. There are countless examples of criminals, foreign and domestic, deploying sophisticated schemes to defraud the government and UI recipients. For example, my staff recently shared with me a press release from the Department of Justice, shown on the board behind me here, announcing a Pennsylvania man pled guilty to obtaining $59 million in public benefits, including unemployment, and laundering the proceeds to China. As a member of the House Select Committee on China, cases like this are deeply concerning to me and confirm our worst fears regarding the attacks on our institutions by hostile nations such as the CCP, Communist Chinese Party. I strongly believe we have a responsibility to bring accountability back to Washington and find out what we can do to bring restitution for taxpayers in the face of such staggering amounts of fraud. There's a lot more work to be done to hold these criminals accountable through the criminal justice system, recoup the billions of dollars on behalf of American taxpayers. So again, I want to thank our witnesses for being here today, for traveling, their valuable time, and their insight that we'll hear from a little bit later here. With that, it's now my pleasure to recognize the gentleman from Illinois, our ranking member, Danny Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I too want to welcome all of our members back of this subcommittee and to our witnesses today. For certain, Democrats want to hold criminals that stole from workers in our unemployment insurance or UI program during the pandemic accountable, unequivocally, and without a doubt. We provided $2 billion in the American Rescue Plan Act to strengthen program integrity, access, and equity. And Democrats want to work on a bipartisan basis to finish the job. However, I cannot begin this hearing and pretend that business is usual in the face of illegal and unethical actions by this administration. I must recognize and criticize the firing of the Department of Labor Inspector General, whose job it was to investigate and prosecute UI fraud, and who specifically asked our committee to extend the statute of limitations for UI fraud. Inspector General Larry Turner served with distinction in both the Trump and Biden administrations and led the Inspector General's office to 1,400 successful pandemic UI fraud prosecutions and over $1 billion in court-ordered restitution and payment. Mr. Turner was recently fired by President Trump, along with nearly all of the nonpartisan inspectors general. After firing these IGs, charged with prosecuting fraud and making sure agencies followed the law, the Trump administration illegally blocked states from accessing essential health, child care, child welfare, and other funding authorized and appropriated by Congress, and illegally blocked nonprofit organizations from accessing already appropriated funds, just as they were trying to make payroll. The harm done by short delay in payments gave us a preview of what might happen if we enacted the cuts being pushed by my Republican colleagues. In the last few days, President Trump gave Elon Musk, an unselected billionaire, and his hackers unfettered access to the extremely confidential data regarding payments to workers, businesses, seniors, and entities around the world via the systems for the Treasury Department, Centers for Medicaid and Medicare, Labor Department, and NIH. These systems include private financial information for seniors receiving Social Security or Medicare, workers receiving tax refunds, private health information about you and your loved ones, and the privileged information of Mr. Musk's business competitors. This hearing is about preventing fraud. Yet this administration appears to be gifting Mr. Musk the unlimited ability to defraud individual Americans, to access their most private financial and health information for any purpose. Will Mr. Musk illegally stop your Social Security, tax, Medicare, Medicaid, or disability payments? Will he claw back your tax refund or Social Security payment if he thinks you didn't deserve it? Will he use his unchecked power to sell your Social Security numbers or bank account information to the highest bidder, or delay government contract payments or grants to his competitors or people he dislikes? As much as my colleagues and I want to finish the job of prosecuting pandemic fraud, and ensure that the unemployment system is ready for the next recession. I cannot ignore the silence of my Republican colleagues in this offensive fraud against the American public. And the sad reality is that the next recession might be very soon, given the president's determination to start trade wars with our closest allies that will skyrocket prices on nearly everything Americans buy. I look forward to hearing from Shelby, Meyenburg, and getting good advice from the workers on the front lines of making sure that state UI programs pay the right workers the right amount at the right time. Yet, I am also extremely concerned that any new inspector generals in this current lawless environment would not appropriately target true criminal rings and instead focus on the workers unemployed during the pandemic who received overpayments due to no fault of their own. The very first step, Mr. Chairman, is for our committee to work together to protect the privacy and prevent the defrauding of the American people. I thank you very much. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Davis, for your opening statement. We'll now turn to our witnesses here today, and I will introduce them here in a second. Again, thank you for being here today, and look forward to your testimony and our questions and answers from the committee members. I will introduce from my left to right. Our first witness is Haywood Talcove, who is the Chief Executive Officer of LexisNexis Special Services Incorporated in McLean, Virginia. Next, we'll hear from Ms. Anna Hugh, who is the Director of the Missouri Department of Labor and Industrial Relations in Jefferson City, Missouri. Thirdly, we'll hear from Jeffrey Ficke, who is the CEO and founder of Russell Allen Partners in Cincinnati, Ohio. And lastly, we'll hear from Shelby Meyenburg, who is an unemployment insurance worker with the Washington Federation of State Employees. Welcome to you all. We'll begin with you, Mr. Talcove. You're recognized for 5 minutes to deliver your opening statement.
Chairman Smith, Chairman LaHood, Ranking Member Davis, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak on fraud and government assistance programs. During the pandemic, we witnessed a health crisis and then a massive wave of fraud that shockingly continues today. Domestic and transnational criminals likely stole $1 trillion across all assistance programs meant to help needy Americans. The money was used to traffic drugs, traffic children, and threaten our democracy. COVID-19 was neither the first nor will it be the last disaster to test this nation. Just this past year, we witnessed storms destroying whole communities in North Carolina and wildfires that burnt across Southern California. And once again, we are seeing the criminals attack at scale. Fraud is a financial problem, fraud is a national security problem, and fraud is a human problem. I'd like to suggest 3 proven solutions that can significantly reduce this transfer of assets to criminal organizations. Number 1, apply identity verification on the front end. Number 2, end self-certification. And number 3, continuously authenticate beneficiaries. For too long, the government has treated identity verification as an afterthought. For years, we have seen the catastrophic result. Criminals from across the globe flooding state and federal systems, stealing trillions meant for Americans. We must finally understand that pay and chase does not work. In fact, of the $250 billion stolen from taxpayers from the unemployment insurance program during the pandemic, less than $5 billion has been recovered thus far. Criminals do this because the pandemic taught them that government programs are the mark. They never run out of money, and you likely won't be arrested. If we fail to act, we are complicit in funding fraudsters, organized criminals, nation states, and even terrorists who use these programs as their personal checking accounts. At the beginning of the pandemic, I spoke with the state UI director who assured me her program had no fraud. 3 short weeks later, They had more benefit claims than residents over the age of 18. Criminals move faster than government systems. But fraud does not stop at the door. It's just not external actors gaming the system. Insiders, corrupt employees and contractors steal from the programs, taking advantage of their access to systems and passwords, bilking the very people they're supposed to be serving. Today, the threat is growing exponentially. AI-powered fraud networks generate fake identities that pass dated NIST verification standards from 2017. Bots file thousands of applications in seconds. Deepfake technology generates quote-unquote real people that bypass security safeguards. Criminals are evolving in real time. Our response must be just as fast, just as smart, and just as relentless. To stop this, we need AI, we need data sharing, and we need changes to the 1974 Privacy Act. Fraud is a data problem and can be mitigated in today's world. Fraud on this scale is not inevitable. It's the result of legacy systems, outdated and complex regulations, lack of data, and failure to act. This is all achievable today. Taxpayers do not want their funds going to criminal groups. The funds should go to those in need. I'm not suggesting we need technological breakthroughs. The solutions are clear, tested, and available now and used by the private sector, whose fraud rate is less than 3% compared to 20% in the public sector. If we do the following, number one, verify identities, number two, eliminate self-certification, and number three, continuously authenticate beneficiaries, then we can restore integrity to our assistance programs, ensure taxpayer dollars reach those who truly need them, and prevent criminals from exploiting the American people. I would also urge you to extend the statute of limitations related to the CARES Act that expires on March 27th. We are failing the single mother who relies on food assistance, the unemployed worker who genuinely needs support, and families. We are also failing the taxpayer by allowing around $1 trillion annually to be lost to fraud and improper payments. Thank you, Chairman Smith, Chairman LaHood, Ranking Member Davis, and members of the committee for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you, Mr. Talcove. We'll now turn to Ms. Hugh. You are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman LaHood, Ranking Member Davis, and distinguished committee members, my name is Anna Hugh, and I'm the Director of the Missouri Department of Labor and Industrial Relations, and have served in that position since 2017. I thank you and Chairman Smith for the invitation to come today and testify before you all. Our Division of Employment Security administers our state's unemployment insurance, or UI, program, and was responsible for administering pandemic unemployment programs. I'm proud that Missouri is consistently among the nation's leaders in preventing improper UI payments, providing benefits to the rightful recipients, and, along with state agency partners, providing high-quality reemployment services to assist unemployed Missourians. But first, let me explain the basics of regular unemployment insurance. Imagine you're purchasing car insurance. You pay premiums. In turn, the insurance company covers potential losses like car accidents. The more accidents you have, the higher your premiums. Conversely, a clean driving record could lead to lower premiums. The UI program operates similarly. Employers pay taxes, and those funds provide temporary partial income support to eligible workers who lose their jobs through no fault of their own. This system encourages employers to maintain a stable workforce, minimize layoffs, and reduce the number of claims filed against their accounts. Just as your car insurance premiums will increase with accidents, an employer's UI tax rate increases with frequent valid claims. This built-in incentive motivates employers to actively participate in the claims process and creates a greater likelihood that only legitimate claims are paid out. Additionally, individuals filing for unemployment insurance not only have to meet eligibility requirements for the initial claim, but also every week they make a request for benefits. Prior to the pandemic, UI fraud typically involved claimants failing to meet work search requirements or receiving benefits while employed. That was essentially what traditional improper payments were. However, the pandemic dramatically shifted the landscape. Fraud evolved to encompass large-scale identity theft, with criminals stealing personally identifiable information, PII, to file fraudulent claims. This shift was driven by the massive influx of money into the system and the rush to distribute it, making traditional safeguards less effective. In Missouri, we're fortunate to have already put in place in 2016 a modernized information technology system, advanced fraud detection methods and tools, and partnerships with third-party vendors specializing in fraud prevention. Additionally, for years, Missouri has been a member of the National Association of State Workforce Agencies, NASWA, Integrity Center, and has actively participated in the Integrity Data Hub. This multifaceted approach was and is still critical to our success, to the integrity of Missouri's UI system, and to the value of every tax dollar. With the right systems, tool, and partnerships, stopping UI fraud is not impossible, but extending the statute of limitations for CARES Act-related UI fraud and overpayment recovery is crucial. The current deadline is March 27, 2025, and it looms large. Without an extension, prosecutions will be impossible after that date, allowing criminals to escape justice and potentially leaving billions of dollars in overpayments due to fraud unrecovered. This is unacceptable. Beyond extending the statute of limitations, broader UI program reforms are essential, as proposed in H.R. 1163, the Protecting Taxpayers and Victims of Unemployment Fraud Act. We must move away from the pay and chase model, which is inherently vulnerable to fraud, and implement more robust preventative measures. The current Department of Labor administrative funding model often penalizes efficient states. Its heavy reliance on workload as a means to distribute funds can serve as a deterrent for states to pursue transformative efficiencies. This disincentivizes efficiency and perpetuates systemic problems. The current funding model plays catch-up to actual program needs, especially during economic downturns. It is also a disincentive to long-term investment, as the short-term nature of some funding sources discourages the state from making critical investments in technology and cybersecurity that incur ongoing costs for licensing, maintenance, and support. In 2023, Missouri businesses paid approximately $130 million in federal Unemployment Tax Act FUTA taxes to the U.S. Treasury. Yet Missouri only received $38.5 million in UI program administrative funding from DOL. This chronic underfunding forced us to lobby for state funds from the Missouri legislature to shore up funding for our UI program and create a long-term modernization plan. For every state UI administrator in the U.S., this situation is unsustainable. In line with NASA's 2025 legislative priorities, dedicated technology funding should be a separate, consistent stream for modernization, including cybersecurity, AI, and data analytics. Finally, adequate funding investments in modernization remain relevant and secure, and we must make sure that ongoing maintenance and support are there. The pandemic underscored the need for a modern, resilient, secure UI system. By prioritizing accuracy, investing in technology, and reforming the funding model, we can ensure that the UI program continues to serve its vital function, providing a safety net to workers during times of economic hardship, while safeguarding the integrity of the system and the trust of the American people. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. And as this is a public forum, I cannot provide any specific details to the fraud measures that we have in place in Missouri.
Thank you, Ms. Hugh. We'll now turn to Mr. Ficke. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman LaHood, Ranking Member Davis, and the members of the subcommittee, I want to thank you for this opportunity to present. My name is Jeff Ficke, and I'm the CEO of Russell Allen Partners, located in Cincinnati, Ohio. My entire career is focused on technology, innovation, and operations around payments. I'll give you a little bit of background about that because it covers government and financial services. In the 90s, I was a founding member of a payments company that supported government service organizations, several federally funded, state-operated programs, including unemployment. After that company was sold, I moved to the financial services industry working for Fifth Third Bank. I led central operations, which transferred approximately $14 trillion a year in funds using ACH, wire, card, and check. After that, I moved on to run Fifth Third's commercial payments line of business for the last 6 years of my career in banking. Before I present about the opportunities I see exist between these agencies and financial services, I want to discuss my role in the pandemic and the unemployment. At that time, early phase of the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program was being deployed to those not eligible for traditional unemployment. Ohio was experiencing cybercrime attacks that result in Ohio reporting about $1.8 billion in fraudulent overpayments. $1.4 billion was through PUA, and about $400 million were about traditional unemployment. I do understand that today the COVID era pandemic unemployment support is due to expire. I would encourage that to be extended. I want to start by explaining my involvement in Ohio. It started in 2021. My expertise in government services and banking aligned well with Ohio's needs. I was named to run Ohio's public-private partnership. The volume of claims were skyrocketing, the unadjudicated claims and backlog was growing out of control, and citizens' inquiries to the agency were overwhelming. Governor DeWine made the decision to engage the private sector. He worked directly with the Ohio Business Roundtable, a group of about 100 of Ohio's largest public sector CEOs, to engage their membership for expertise. The Ohio Business Roundtable is run by former U.S. Congressman Pat Tiberi. Governor DeWine recognized that the private sector had experience in these crisis situations. My role was to lead the coordination of all these activities between Ohio's Department of Jobs and Family Services and the private sector. We provided advice and guidance during the execution of these recommendations. We had access to senior leaders from places like Fifth Third Bank, Western Southern, Key Bank, Nationwide Insurance, and others. As I had testified multiple times that I had the opportunity to testify multiple times in front of the state's legislative subcommittees. Governor DeWine and ODJFS's Director Matt Damschroeder gave 3 clear objectives at that phase. The first goal was to stop the fraudulent claims from being submitted. In early 2021, the state was receiving over 1 million claims a month for new unemployment claims and PUA claims. With advice from the private sector and ODJFS team, we were able to deploy a new fraud stack. And that happened within the first 60 days of our engagement. The results were overwhelming. New unemployment claims dropped in 2 months to less than 25,000 a month. That was a 97% reduction in fraud with a new set of technologies was deployed. LexisNexis was a key partner for us at that point in the process. And you can see on the graphic some of the reductions that took place as a part of the PUA. The second objective was really clear, there was approaching 5 million unadjudicated claims-related issues. We actually took a new approach to actually engage the big data corporations, data analytics teams to actually help us to accelerate that. We did take advantage of programs that were completed by Innovate Ohio, advanced data analytics platform supported by then Lieutenant Governor John Husted, who's now a U.S. Senator for Ohio. The P3 team engaged subject matter experts from the private sector and big tech to help segment those. Within 90 days of the project starting, Ohio had all fraud-free claims for Ohio citizens had been adjudicated and the proper payments were being sent. The third goal was to answer questions from an enormous volume of citizens. Many Ohioans were victims of cybercrime, while others who needed benefits were not being processed because of the backlog. During this period, the service centers were overwhelmed. Citizens experienced difficulties getting through and sometimes had up to a six-hour hold time. You can see in the chart that's displayed here that we returned all those to commercially acceptable standards with call handle times increased and call times, hold times less than 3 minutes. The governor's reasoning for seeking this advice and collaboration in Ohio's sector proved to be an outstanding decision. I also want to acknowledge that Ohio's ODJFS employees welcomed the support, worked endless hours to deliver, and truly cared about every citizen who needed the support from the organization. In the last segment I want to talk about is what I feel is a partnership that can exist between government and financial services collaboration. One of the key initiatives launched at the direction of Director Damschroeder was to understand if there was any funds that would be available and left to be returned. We We started by confirming our understanding of how this money flowed from initial claims. The traditional unemployment and PUA program solutions required claims adjudication that, as well as collections of payment history. The program's checks are focused on claimants' payments are sent to the.
Mr. Ficke, I'm just going to interrupt you there for a second. You're a little bit over. We're going to ask you to just pause
summarize.
there. Yeah, if you don't mind, and we'll take the rest of your statement for the record, if you don't mind doing that.
Sure.
Okay.
I just want to talk about just future recommendations, and I'll pause. First of all, the banks and the agencies are both accountable to multiple regulatory organizations. Aligning them so that we can actually get data sharing between the banks and the agencies is a very clear opportunity. Secondly, the digital payment networks in this space have actually introduced new threats, new opportunities, and for example, PayPal returned almost $70 million to the state of Ohio on money that they held. Not all not all mobile payment networks had that kind of diligence. The third opportunity is that fourth, the banks also are at a point where they can follow a sheetment law, which would actually allow the funds to be held for a period of time and then returned into unclaimed funds. I don't understand how that's going to actually play out in the long run, and issues that still need to be determined. I understand the statute of limitations. I do encourage it to be passed along with House Bill 1163. We've spoken at multiple NASWA and UWC conferences on it. Look forward to answering your questions. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. Lastly, we'll recognize Mr. Meyenburg. You're recognized for your opening statement.
Okay. Good afternoon, Chairman LaHood, Ranking Member Davis, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Shelby Meyenburg. I'm an employment service worker in the state of Washington. In this role, I also help UI claimants file their benefits. I'm a proud member of AFSCME Council 28 and the Washington Federation of State Employees Local 443. I help Washingtonians file for unemployment insurance and safeguard the UI system against fraud. My job is to get the right benefits to the right people on time. In 2020, the pandemic hit Washington state quickly. Our state unemployment rate rose from 5.1% in March to over 15% in April, immediately placing a lot of stress on our system. Unlike other states, Washington hired non-permanent staff instead of outsourcing UI work during the pandemic. I was one of those non-permanent staff. At this time, non-permanent staff had received less than half of the normal training for the UI program. It was a chaotic and challenging time where UI claimants were desperate and the caseloads were enormous. In the spring of '22, I was laid off from my non-permanent position and had to file for unemployment benefits myself. It was a humbling experience to go from processing UI claims to applying for UI. After being laid off, I applied for a permanent position under the state's merit-based personnel system and was hired in July of '22. My evolution from non-permanent to permanent staffer showed me the value of being a highly skilled employment service worker who understands the complexities of the UI program. UI workers are the first line of defense protecting hard-earned benefits from fraud. We safeguard the system with identity checks, reviewing and securely transmitting personally identifiable information. We help jobless workers make sense of the sometimes confusing language in the UI program. As an example, we let them know when they should file for an appeal. We resolve complex claims, which takes training, a deep knowledge of the program, persistence, and dedication to our mission. This is important work that highly skilled and well-trained UI workers do every day for American workers. UI workers hired under a merit-based personnel system as required under federal law ensures that the services provided to job seekers and employers across the country are unbiased and high quality. UI workers cannot have any other interest at play other than serving the jobless worker and maintaining the integrity of the UI program. There are ways to prepare for future surges in unemployment without undermining merit staffing. One solution is for states to cross-train existing merit staff for other programs to process UI claims. I'm a cross-trained employment service worker, what we call a UI ambassador. If a state experiences a surge of unemployment claims, these cross-trained merit staff state employees would receive a brief refresher training and be able to hit the ground running in order to help workers and keep our system and communities moving forward. As you work together on UI reform, I urge that you talk to UI workers directly as they are the subject matter experts. We want to protect the UI system and make sure that it works well enough for everyone and protect the system from fraud. We can accomplish these goals with increased funding for staffing, IT modernization, program improvements, and cooperation between the state and federal levels, not by outsourcing the work of skilled merit-based UI staff. I'd like to thank the chair, ranking member, and members of the subcommittee for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you, Mr. Meyenburg, for your testimony here today. We'll now move to questions from the committee members to our panelists today. Again, grateful for your contributions here today to this important topic. I'll now recognize myself for my questioning. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Talcove. For years, this committee has been raising sounding the alarm really on fraud from organized criminal organizations, particularly from a number of hostile nations, Russia, China, and others. As you saw in my opening statement, I referred to a case in Pennsylvania involving a defendant caught laundering money back to China. These cases are complex, they're nuanced, involve federal crimes, but they also raise serious national security concerns. Mr. Talcove, can you explain the current state of UI fraud and how international criminal organizations are continuing to be associated with fraudulent activity?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question. And it's interesting in that I was just out in California, in LA this week, and the fires are going there. And you are now seeing the same groups that stole at scale in California, $32.6 billion from the unemployment insurance program. They're now stealing from the disaster unemployment insurance, the disaster SNAP program. So what these criminal groups do, in particular China, Russia, Nigeria, Romania, is they use stolen information. Some of it they collected directly. For example, China, when they had the OPM breach years ago, they have all that information, and they file claims on behalf of legitimate individuals in the afflicted areas. And then they use that money for just terrible things. And what I find incredibly frustrating, having followed fraud since Hurricane Katrina in 2006, it's the same groups doing the same thing. And if you just apply data and analytics, just as Mr. Ficke was showing on those charts, you can stop it. But we continue to allow these groups to steal. They use the money for horrible things, child trafficking. They use it for drugs in our communities. They use it for terrorism. So I'd like to tell you that things are better today, but just watching what's going on in California, seeing what happened in North Carolina, same groups, same playbook, stealing at scale.
Thank you for that. Just to follow up, in terms of criminal prosecutions that have been successful, are there any that come to mind that have had somewhat of a deterrent effect on continuing criminal activity?
Yeah, so I would give Washington State credit during the pandemic. They were the first group to get hit by a Nigerian fraud organization, and they actually did capture the ringleader in that. But for the most part, these people do not live in this country. They will never come to this country. They are protected by their states, and that is why you have to protect things on the front end. You can't let the money out. Now, if it does go out, right, remember my estimate, $250 billion was stolen, $5 billion recovered. If it does go out, state and local law enforcement can't do it. You need the Secret Service and you need the FBI because these are complicated, multifaceted criminal enterprises.
Thank you for that. I'm going to turn now to Ms. Hugh. In your testimony, you talked related to the Missouri Department of Labor. They currently have a UI program that's effective in preventing improper payments and providing high-quality reemployment services. Last Congress, Ranking Member Davis and I worked on a bill called the Bridge to Workers Act that was passed into law to provide the flexibility states need to strengthen those connections to employment. Can you talk about the work with reemployment services and how you see that growing and developing into a core part of unemployment programming in the future?
Certainly, thank you for the opportunity to answer your question. And thank you, Chairman LaHood and Ranking Member Davis, for actually getting the Bridge for Workers Act passed. It's really afforded states a great deal of flexibility to approach individuals that have potentially more challenges to actually getting back to work. Missouri was one of the few states that actually kept our reemployment and eligibility assessment program, RESEA or RESEA, going during the pandemic. And by having this expansion of flexibility to allow for states to better address what their local workforce needs are and basically providing targeted professional workforce development services to individuals. Originally, it was for folks who are most likely to exhaust their benefits. But now, again, it allows states to really be able to better fit what their local state needs are. This program in particular has the built-in component that when we require somebody to report for these required workforce services, if they are utilizing unemployment benefits, their benefits are not continued if they don't report for those. So it builds in that incentive, again, to make sure that workforce services that are needed are actually being taken, and again, to stress the reemployment roots of unemployment itself, right? Because we really see that unemployment and workforce services as part of the two sides of the same coin. It's really about making sure that workers have the services and support needed to get back to sustainable employment.
Thank you for that, Ms. Hugh. Mr. Ficke, in your testimony, you described how you were recruited by Governor DeWine in Ohio to help right the ship, recovering over $400 million in fraudulent benefits held by banks and automated payment networks. I'm particularly interested in that success story because according to a report issued by the Illinois Auditor General, my home state, we lost approximately $5 billion and only $189 million has been recovered. Can you talk about how you were able to turn that around in Ohio through your UI program and recoup the funds? And then maybe before you answer that, we've heard the expression pay and chase. Can you explain for the members of the committee what that means and what that is?
Well, first of all, with the pay and chase, I might defer that to.
Well, maybe answer my
Talcove.
question on how you did in Ohio, and then I'll have Mr. Talcove answer the pay and chase.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. I think it's really important to understand how much manual effort and personnel effort went into actually discovering these funds. I mean, at the very early phases of our opportunities to recover funds, we partnered very well with the leadership of Ohio Jobs and Family Services and literally asked a simple question: is there still money out in the networks to be able to do this? I think it's really important fundamentally to understand that in the UI claims environment, for approval and adjudication, there's a lot of work done to identify an individual. In the banking industry, when payments flow through, especially since 9/11, post that period, there's regulation that is also very tightly covered by the banking industry, financial services, that actually require them to not allow money to get out of banks into the hands of fraudsters. The one looks at identity, and the banking system can look at activity within a bank, within a specific bank account. At a very simplistic level, it's looking at multiple unemployment claims from multiple states going into the same accounts, unusual spending happening within those financial service institution accounts, large overseas transactions that actually are pulling money out of a consolidation to pull them overseas. That effort has resulted in the U.S. banking industry setting up multiple advanced analytics programs, caseworkers, and processes to actually prevent that from happening. The difficult work we had in that is that we were actually required at that point to work with all the banks who received funds. They didn't have a specific contractual relationship with each individual state because they were the receiving banks. Simplifying it, it basically means that's the bank of the claimant who is actually getting the information. And in our case, that required us to go beyond the individual head of ACH or operations leaders and get to the newly established or recently established groups within the banks that actually allowed those fraud measures to be kept in place. We were able to find the money. We were able to confirm it. We actually coordinated activities to compare data between potential fraudulent claims at the state with fraudulent account activity, identify what was remaining. What ended up happening in that case is that we actually then had to have legal agreements, sometimes referred as hold harmless agreements, limitations of liability, that actually had to be executed post this whole process happening. Many banks cooperated. I would give credit to ODJFS because Director Damschroeder made it a clear initiative that he wanted those funds back. We prioritized it. They invested people and time and energy into it, and we got great cooperation from many financial institutions.
Thank you for that. Maybe quickly, Mr. Talcove, you've used the expression pay and chase. Tell members of our audience and the committee members what that means.
I believe it's a false paradigm that says that you can't have speed and security. And I would just reference that most of you have probably used Amazon. You placed an order, it gets there quickly, and everything works out really well for you. In government, sometimes what they do is they rather just pay it really quickly and then try to get the money back later. And as you noted in your opening statement, only $5 billion of the $250 billion has been returned. The second point I want to make on that, I would encourage each of you to try to go and look on your state's UI page and try to fill out an unemployment insurance form. Sometimes the overpayments or underpayments are related to the complexities of the forms. And it really does create a whole set of backlogs for those that are administering the programs. Those forms are complicated.
Thank you for that. I'll now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Davis, for his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to all of our witnesses. Mr. Meyenburg, let me ask you, given that Elon Musk and hackers with no security training or policy expertise now have unlimited access to confidential financial and health data for workers and businesses, I wanted to talk a little bit about how we're supposed to safeguard data. As a frontline UI worker, you collect confidential identity and banking information. What kind of training do you have to keep that data safe and private?
So during initial UI worker training, there's a heavy emphasis on how to properly conduct identity information verification. Throughout the entire process, 6 to 8 weeks, you're constantly having to do that process. There's role-playing scenarios that covers a lot of topics, and during all of those, you do have to conduct the correct identification verification. There's several reasons why a UI claimant's identity would be flagged for further review. If I clearly spot fake information or misdocumented information, I have to send that up for review. If a claimant's personal information does not match what's on the state's driver's license system, that one's also flagged for review by the fraud team. We work together to safeguard the UI benefits from fraud, and we also ensure that we're using our training and experience to help claimants who have challenges accessing benefits because they're not tech savvy. This is why the role of a UI ambassador who can see through those challenges to help a worker in need is so critical.
Why is this information safer when we limit access to public employees like yourself?
It's safer because we have no ulterior motive. We are there to help the people of Washington State. In my case, we don't have to worry about those expectations of a quota system or anything like that. We meet the people where they're at, and we help them where they're at.
Let me just reemphasize that my Democratic colleagues and I are strongly committed to good service by workers like yourself, and especially people who have no need to access their earned unemployment benefits. We're committed to preventing fraud and safeguarding the UI Trust Fund. So I'm grateful to you and your colleagues, and especially to AFSCME Council 31 workers in Illinois for their critical work. Is there anything that we have to give up in order to do both, provide the good service and have no other purpose for doing it, ulterior motives?
I don't believe so. I believe we can accomplish both goals at the same time. In fact, this is built into our process. Before we talk to you, I claim it about their benefits. We verify their identity every single time we talk with an individual, no exceptions. After identification, we can then provide excellent customer service, whether that be filing an initial claim or reviewing an active claim.
Let me again just thank you and your workforce and your colleagues for the work that you have done and the faith and trust that we have in what it is that you do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. We'll now I'll now recognize one of our new members, Rudy Yackham of South Bend, Indiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Unemployment insurance, improper payments, and fraud ran rampant during the COVID-19 pandemic. The Government Accountability Office, or GAO, estimates that pandemic unemployment fraud totaled $135 billion. That's about 15% of total UI benefits paid during the pandemic. But the Department of Labor's Inspector General says that number is at least $191 billion. Even worse, outside experts estimate that the total could be upwards of $400 billion. California alone accounts for $20 to $33 billion of fraudulent pandemic UI payments. One estimate put the state's improper payment rate at nearly 37% during the first 6 months of the pandemic. No business could survive allowing for over 1/3 of payments that are made to be fraudulent. We should expect more of our government and of our states. We should expect that fraud, and we know that fraud isn't just money going out the door, it's money that undermines the faith that the American people have in the system and the confidence that Congress has in states to manage federal resources. Hardworking Hoosiers in my district don't want their taxpayer dollars going to subsidize California or any other state with such lax payment controls unless the state implements reforms, upgrades systems, and demonstrates a commitment to chasing down fraudsters. Despite these eye-popping fraud numbers, we've only recovered about $5 billion of it, or less than 4%. The statute of limitations to prosecute these cases expires at the end of March. Congress must extend that deadline so that we can continue unwinding these criminal rings and hold the fraudsters accountable. One of our most important responsibilities as members of Congress is to be good stewards of taxpayer money. Because after all, the only money that we in the federal government have is money that we take from the American people in the form of taxes. Allowing this level of fraud to occur and not taking every possible step to recover these funds and these fraudulent payments would be irresponsible. Mr. Chairman, I ask that this email from the DOJ pertaining to uncharged UI fund matters be entered into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. Talcove, as of January 28th, 2025, the Department of Justice had 1,648 open cases. These are uncharged criminal matters relating to COVID-19 fraud. The Department of Labor's Inspector General has shown approximately 157,000 open UI fraud complaints assigned to its hotline office. Are you surprised about the sheer number of unemployment insurance fraud cases our federal law enforcement agencies are actively investigating?
Thank you so much for the question. I want to start with, I really believe in unemployment insurance. The number that was lost was approximately $250 billion across the country, and California was ground zero for it, unfortunately, because they paid some of the highest benefits in the country, and their then commissioner, Julie Sue, had some of the least amount of safeguards in place. I'm actually surprised that there are that many open cases because I truly believe a lot of the fraud took place and individuals don't even know their information was used. As I mentioned in my testimony, a lot of this happened with criminal groups, both domestic and transnational, who will use the stolen PII that went into these eligibility determination systems that knew how to manipulate them better than your constituents. And to this day, and we were talking about it before, you had individuals that got a notice from the state of California, the state of Ohio, saying, you got your benefits, and those people threw those notes away because they never got benefits. So I'm not surprised by that, but I also want to note that it's not just unemployment insurance. It's the SNAP program, it's the other programs, including rental assistance. Anywhere where the government is providing a check, these criminal groups are now working at scale.
Thank you. And briefly, Mr. Talcove, do you believe that there's still more unemployment fraud carried over from the pandemic out there that could result in prosecution or recouping funds if we were to extend the statute of limitations?
Yes, I think there is.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Yakum. Recognize Ms. Chu of California.
Well, first, let me say that I can't believe that Republicans are holding a hearing purportedly about going after pandemic-related fraud in the unemployment insurance program without addressing the fact that a few days ago, President Trump illegally fired the Inspector General who is responsible for doing that very work. Inspector General Larry Turner was a well-respected, nonpartisan, Senate-confirmed professional. His leadership investigating UI fraud had already resulted in over 2,000 individuals charged, more than 1,400 convictions, and $1.1 billion in taxpayer dollars recovered. And IG Turner even testified as a witness for the Republican majority for the hearing they held on UI fraud back in 2023, during which time he warned that despite the office's successes, insufficient funding from Congress was limiting their investigative capacity and causing lost opportunities to hold fraudsters accountable. The Republican majority still hasn't addressed that funding shortfall, and now President Trump has fired the person responsible for reducing that fraud. If Republicans want to better combat and prosecute UI fraud, we need to push back against President Trump's illegal firing of our nation's top UI fraud investigator and get Mr. Turner and other independent, nonpartisan inspector generals across government whom the president illegally removed back on the job. And then, if we have the fraud, who is going to do the work of actually deterring it? Well, it would be our federal employees. And yet, the Trump administration's undermining of the federal workforce goes far beyond inspector generals. It's part of a systematic attempt to politicize the civil service and make services worse for everyday Americans who rely on safety net programs like unemployment insurance. Those attacks on our civil service include mass emails to almost all federal employees asking them to resign and then threatening layoffs if not enough employees comply with this. It includes the administration's proposal to politicize the federal workforce by stripping nonpartisan federal employees of their job protections to make it easier to fire and replace them with Trump loyalists. And it includes putting tens of thousands of employees on administrative leave without cause. We have career civil servants for a reason. They are professionals with expertise who are essential to the successful operation of federal programs and benefits for the American people. And that includes the staff responsible for investigating UI fraud. In fact, Inspector General Turner led a team of over 300 federal employees, including criminal investigators, auditors, attorneys, and other subject matter experts dedicated to combating waste and fraud in all of the Department of Labor's programs, including UI. The Trump administration's actions put us at risk of losing this expertise, and it's jeopardizing our ability to continue successfully going after this fraud. I'm also concerned that the Trump administration's threats to fire federal employees will lead to further outsourcing of core government responsibilities. We saw during the pandemic what happened when states outsourced their UI work to untrained contractors, and that, in some cases, actually caused waste and fraud in the program by giving employers incorrect information resulting in overpayments or by exposing workers' sensitive information to fraud rings. Now, Mr. Meyenburg, you testified about the risks of outsourcing during the pandemic. Can you expand on that and why investing in an experienced and robust government workforce leads to better outcomes than outsourcing to contractors?
Yes, I believe it comes down to two different things. It's training and the mission. With dedicated staff that have dedicated time for implementing robust training programs, this offers the ability to highlight those safeguards and make sure that they're utilized in a proper way.
And could you have more waste and fraud happening with the contractors?
Potentially. I would say potentially.
Yes. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Pursuant to committee practice, we'll now move to 2-to-1 questioning. I'll recognize a new member of the subcommittee on Ways and Means, Max Miller of Ohio.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman LaHood and Ranking Member Davis, and excuse my voice. Thank you for the opportunity to hold this important hearing. We must make every effort to equip and empower Americans to re-enter the workforce and unlock the full potential of our nation's economy. To achieve that, it's imperative that we safeguard the integrity of our employment safety net. Since coming to Congress, I have been a strong proponent of building our nation's future workforce by providing individuals with opportunities to acquire qualifying work skills and keep the United States at the forefront of innovation and productivity. Like many, I am very concerned, as you have heard from a lot of our colleagues on the side of the aisle, to learn the unprecedented fraud that occurred during the pandemic, which the GAO has estimated, which we've heard a lot today, anywhere between $100 billion to $135 billion and possibly more. Just in Northeast Ohio alone, where I'm from, the United States Attorney for the Northern District of the state sentenced perpetrators who stole millions of dollars from the program intended to assist the unemployed, which was all over our area. This commitment to prosecute and to hold criminals responsible demonstrates that we must continue to be vigilant of those who try to scam federal relief programs and waste our tax dollars, including providing federal investigators with the continued authority to prosecute those stealing from American workers. It is my understanding that 2,000 individuals have been prosecuted with $47 billion, say it again, $47 billion in potential fraud to date. But there are at least 157,000 open cases and much more to be done that are unaccounted for at this moment in time to date. Fortunately, efforts such as those undertaken by my home state of Ohio and others will help their respective states' unemployment system to stop unemployment insurance fraud before it starts and get resources to eligible workers in a timely and accurate fashion. And I believe that's what everyone would like, regardless of political affiliation. Mr. Ficke, as you testified, the state of Ohio is experiencing a high volume of fraudulent claims. In fact, the unadjudicated claims backlog was growing exponentially, and as you know, Ohio's governor made a decision to engage the private sector for support, including the Ohio Business Roundtable's members' expertise that you had mentioned earlier, with a goal to stop fraudulent claims, reduce the backlog, and re-engineer the customer experience. I understand the project's results exceeded expectations. How can such public and private partnerships be effective in reducing fraud, safeguarding valuable public resources, and allowing funds to be targeted to those who are truly in need?
Thank you for the question. In Ohio's case, I think that some of the key factors involved is collaboration across agencies, across the state and federal resources, especially when it comes to, as an example, the prosecution of those cases. If you look at the amount of work that Ohio Department of Jobs and Family Services did, they focused a lot on advanced analytics, taking advantage of big data technology programs to really segment off the claims that actually were fraud-free so that we could actually get to the point of real citizens in need were getting paid. And the other thing I think that the state did an excellent job at is that the claims that were submitted that were actually had significant amount of fraud indicators on them were all processed, and they were all ultimately looked at and freed. In the long run, I think the other thing that was really important was taking all that advanced analytics and data and actually providing it to the law enforcement sides to actually enable the actual prosecution with good data and with things that are going with it. I think it's very important, and it's a core part of my testimony, is the collaboration between the financial services industry and the unemployment agencies. There is lots of really important analytics work that's been done in both of those worlds that actually required and can provide a collaborative effort to go between those. The work that NASL has done around the Integrity Center, I think, is very important. And Lieutenant Governor Eusted's focus on advanced analytics for the state of Ohio clearly put Ohio in a very good position coming into this, at a time when, in Ohio's case, they had to stand up a brand-new system for the pandemic unemployment assistance programs that went with it. So collaboration, advanced analytics, and really working with some of the key private sector organizations to enable that, I think, is critical. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ficke, and I just want to thank you again for all the work you do in my home state, in our home state. It is very much needed, and just thank you again from an Ohioan to another Ohioan. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Now recognize Mr. Beam of Northern Florida. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon to you, and good afternoon, Work and Welfare Committee family. I'm one of the new guys. It's an honor to be here. I was sent to Congress. I believe one of the reasons that Northeast Florida sent me to Congress was I want to go after spending. I think we have an out-of-control government that just spends far more money than it has. And so I'm a man on a mission to fight fraud, abuse, waste, and to get spending under control. So, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for your draft selection and allowing me to serve. Ranking Member Davis, it's an honor to be with you as well. My first question, well, first of all, Mr. Talcove, I appreciate you. You've actually mentioned anywhere government's giving away checks, you will find fraud. And indeed, we did that. I come from the Small Business Committee where we did the PPP program and the EIDL loan program. And we have reports that 23%, over 1 in 5 loans that we made back then are pure fraud. Not somebody making a mistake on an application, not somebody checking the wrong box, but fraudsters that had the sole intent of stealing our money. We actually had an administrator come before us with the Biden administration and says, you know, it may be too much. Maybe we just need to let it all go. I say no. The American people says no. And so we want our money back. I actually filed the bill. We want our money back, to not let anything go. We want all of our money back. We heard from fraudsters that use Barbie dolls to take a picture. We had a program, a fintech that administered the program that would take a picture of you just to make sure you're an individual person. And the program, fraudsters could take a Barbie doll and stick it in front of a webcam, and the program said, approved, you're approved for a loan. So we called it Swindler Barbie. A new Barbie's in town, Swindler Barbie. Ken got in on it too, by the way, of people stealing money. So the first question goes to you, Mr. Chairman. Where are we on the statute of limitations? How can we make sure that we don't let it go, that we want our money back, and we're going after fraudsters? Where does that stand? Who's running it? Who's in the lead? What's going on?
Well, thanks for the question, Congressman Beam. So as was alluded to by the witnesses and a number of us today, we're coming up on the March 26th date where the statute of limitations will expire. So we have legislation that's been introduced that will be marked up to extend that statute of limitations so we can go after the fraudsters and get to the criminal elements of this and make sure that we get that money recouped for taxpayers.
Amen, amen. We're on schedule, we're on flight. It's a very tricky thing. So you and Mr. Davis last year did a program that's called the Reemployment Services and Eligibility Assessment, the RESEA, which really was to help prevent fraud and designate support to those who need it. Does anybody know about that? Mr. Talcove, are you aware of that? Did that program work? Did it work with the intent of delivering help to people that needed it, but not the fraudsters? Good program,
Unfortunately, I'm not aware of that program.
Ms. Shuey?
Yeah, so that program really allows for local workforce boards and other professionals who are working with individuals who are currently getting unemployment benefits to
Did
really.
it prevent fraud or help fraud? Did it help or not?
I think it does help with fraud because you actually have to show up in person or virtually to actually do an appointment about workforce development. So there is that verification and engagement, and we feel that those more personalized service will result in better workforce outcomes, more sustained employment for those individuals. So there is that individual touch to that. So if someone is getting that benefit, they're also then required to either report in person or do the virtual visit. And
So it's given some benefits. Mr. Talcove, I know we got time. Everything's in a hurry here. We got a boogie. What do we need to do? I helped launch a Doge. I think some of us up here are part of the Doge caucus to say we've got enough with the stealing of our money, enough with the fraud, waste, and abuse. I think American taxpayers are celebrating some of the early wins that we've discovered, fraud and abuse. Where should we start? Where should this committee start to say enough with the waste, fraud, and abuse?
It's three things. It's front-end identity verification, it's no more self-reported information, and it's managing the back end of beneficiaries.
Three small hurdles. It doesn't sound like it's that hard. Shouldn't be that,
The private sector does it every day. Their fraud rate is 3%. The public sector is 20%.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Witnesses, thank you so much. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Now recognize Ms. Moore of Wisconsin.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank our ranking member and all of our witnesses for being here today. I did have a conflict in my schedule, so I was unable to be here an hour ago, but I did have an opportunity to review your testimony, and I appreciate your appearance here today. I want to welcome particularly Mr. Talcove to the Ways and Means Committee. Are you a member? Is he a member of the Ways and Means Committee now? I'm talking about my new colleague here. Mr. Bean.
Hey there.
Hi. Welcome to the Ways and Means Committee. Well, your enthusiasm, of course, is very welcome. And I'm learning now about the Doge caucus and your efforts to reduce waste, feud, and abuse and fraud. I guess what I'm concerned about, Mr. Talcove, is if we are indeed going to combat fraud and waste, how does firing the Inspector General of the Department of Labor contributing to this? I mean, this is a person who successfully prosecuted 1,400 cases, and of course, everybody on the committee would like to see fraud reduced. So how can we expect to do that without an Inspector General on board?
If you go back to, and hopefully you read my opening statement, I think the biggest challenge we have is we don't want to pay and chase. What we want to do is we want to prevent this at the front end.
Okay.
We want to use.
Okay, thank you for that. I don't have a lot of time. So your notion is that this Doge caucus of Mr. Musk, the billionaire going in, is an effective strategy we don't know exactly what he's doing. And I checked with the Speaker of the House. He also has no idea what they're doing. So what information do you have to provide with the subcommittee to demonstrate that this is indeed a better strategy than having an Inspector General on the back end? What are they doing that is making them more effective?
I have nothing to do with the Doge. I don't know what they're doing.
So you don't know what they're doing, okay? But somehow you feel like that the Inspectors General is not a good strategy, okay? Mr. Talcove, you also recommended eliminating broad-based categorical eligibility. You know, just like an infant born at 1 pound, 2 ounces, for example, is categorically eligible for Medicaid because they're disabled. Their mother might also be eligible for WIC or for SNAP. Why do you think disconnecting and making it inconvenient for them would be helpful, particularly since our having disconnected these benefits has cost $2.3 billion in administrative expenses over 5 years?
So during the pandemic, I saw over $1 trillion of taxpayer money get stolen. And unfortunately, by having broad-based eligibility determination in place, the criminals were stealing at scale, and they were impacting legitimate individuals that live in Wisconsin, that live in Illinois. It created a huge opportunity for them to exploit the system.
So you just punish the eligible people, like the 99% who are eligible, having them run all over the place. You got your 1 pound, 2 ounce baby, and you got to go to 5 offices to get your benefit so that you can get, okay, I get it. Mr. Meyenburg, we're talking about accountability a lot. Can you explain to me how an unelected, unaccountable billionaire who's accessed this personal information with, I guess, microwave security clearances for his team, how is, and sticking thumb drives in this sensitive information, how is this appropriate?
I honestly have no idea. I'm not even allowed to stick a thumb drive into my own computer to copy any data over, so I don't know why they would have access to that.
Mr. Chairman, my time is winding down, but I do appreciate your hearing from me. Mr. Ranking Member, I thank you for your leadership as well. And I thank the witnesses, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. We now recognize Nathaniel Moran, a new member of the Ways and Means Committee, new member of the Subcommittee from East Texas. You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look forward to being part of the subcommittee and the full Ways and Means Committee this next session. I've got a number of questions based on the testimony that's been given here today. I wanted to, and I prepared to talk about foreign adversaries and their role in the unemployment insurance fraud issue. But let me start with this, Mr. Talcove. I think you said this earlier. Your quote was, "It's the same groups running the same playbook, stealing at scale." And you even gave some examples of after certain disasters. And you said we need to use data and analytics to effectively prevent some of this. I want you to go back, though, because your 3 recommendations were apply ID verification at the front end, end self-certification, and continuously authenticate beneficiaries. And I love that because it really is front-end oriented. But be more specific when you talk about applying ID verification. I mean, how onerous would this be, or what kind of verification are we talking about to be able to make sure that before the money goes out, because I agree with you, and I'll come back around to this in a second, once it goes out, it is so hard to get back. So we need to make sure that every dollar that goes out is the appropriate dollar. How do we just do some simple ID verification on the front end?
It happens every single day. Every single one of you goes through that identity verification process when you go to your bank, when you use Amazon, when you go online to do e-commerce. And the great thing about the technology today is you don't even know it's happening, right? Think about it. You're at the gas station, you put your credit card in, and all of a sudden you get a text in your phone, and it says, "Congressman, are you really in Washington, D.C.?" So that technology is used in the private sector every single day. One of my frustrations is government seems to use this thing called NIST 800 63-2, I think. It was created in 2017. It's complicated, it's hard. Nobody in the private sector uses it. So the technology is out there every single day, and we all use it. It's just different in government.
Yeah, and you're making the exact point that I was hoping would be brought out here, is that it's easy. It is not that difficult. In fact, today I got one of those texts from my bank asking me if a particular charge, it's an $85 charge, was in fact me using that charge. All I had to do was respond yes, and we're good to go. So I think there is an easier way, a more effective way for us to stop the fraud on the front end and certainly it's going to benefit us on the back end because we've got a number of those cases that are out there that we need to prosecute. But I'm a little bit concerned, I'll just tell you, about the return on investment, the cost-benefit analysis of doing that. What are the size of the claims? And I'll give this to all three of the witnesses, Ms. Hugh, Mr. Ficke, and Mr. Talcove. What's the average size of the claim that we're dealing with once we extend this statute of limitations, if we're able to do that? And what's the cost for actually moving forward to prosecute those claims?
All right. So what I would say is I wouldn't look at the average size of the claims. I would look at the criminal groups. Some of the groups, the China group, APT 41, Scattered Canary, you're talking literally hundreds of millions of dollars, but you need sophisticated law enforcement at the federal level. Agencies like the Secret Service who have been outstanding in this area. So it is worth it, but you have to get to these large fraud rings primarily located overseas.
Yeah, I've got a financial crimes investigation center for the state of Texas located in my hometown of Tyler, and they chase after these groups that do this, and it's the same groups moving about but using the same technologies and the same methodology. Ms. Hugh, you were talking about the stealing of personal identification information on the front end, which gives them the gateway to steal and to create fraud. How are they doing that? How are they obtaining the personal identification information of American citizens?
They just buy it off the dark web. I mean, with all these different data breaches that had happened, it's really kind of open season on the dark web and purchasing legitimate personally identifiable information. And therefore, you can, at least in Missouri, you can get in perhaps and file a claim, but we do have flags within the application that then clue us into there's something not quite right? And the partnerships both between government agencies and private sector, whether it's a vendor like Mr. Talcove's or association like Mr. Ficke's, it's really important that all the partnerships across the board work together and understand what may be some limitations, but also challenges and opportunities. I think the biggest thing for us to realize, though, is that it's not a one-and-done situation. Like this, if you don't accept that update on your operating system, it's a paperweight, an expensive paperweight, right? So we have to adopt that mentality when it comes to protecting taxpayer dollars that are invested, whether it's a UI trust fund or any other beneficiary fund. We want to make sure the eligible people are getting the benefits.
Yeah, I agree. And Mr. Chairman, I see my time is over. I didn't even get to my foreign adversary questions. I'm part of the China Select Committee. I'll tell you, it's really concerning to me that China is at the forefront of this, of stealing our personal information and then being part of obtaining these dollars from American taxpayers, using it against us. It's a national security issue, in my opinion. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Moran. I recognize Mr. Evans of Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Davis. Today I want to discuss improving our unemployment insurance for the betterment. Unemployment insurance is critical benefit for American workers. During the pandemic, unemployment insurance was a lifeline for Pennsylvanians in getting fast emergency assistance. I support increasing the funding for the state unemployment operation so that the workers can get more resources they need help. I specifically want to discuss the important work that merit-based staff do in the U.S. system. The best way that we can fight and prevent unemployment insurance fraud is through hiring well-trained merit-based staff. We know that certain states during the pandemic hired untrained contractors in staff roles, which only led directly to do more fraud and errors in the system. It is interesting that the Musk administration is trying to do the same thing right now inside certain federal agencies, replacing employees with their own unconscionable outside contractors. Right now, the last thing we need is someone unqualified scooping our constituents' private data, including our unemployment system. Mr. Mayor, I'd like to ask you a question. In your testimony, you highlighted the importance of merit-based staffing in the UI system as opposed to states doing outsourcing workers to untrained contractors.
Yes, I believe that merit staff UI workers are key and ideal for helping prevent fraud because there is no third-party system. It is, state workers performing the work of the state and making sure that it stays within the state. It's not a third party by any means.
Can you speak more about experience under merit-based systems and the advantage it has in preventing fraud?
Yes. When you say are a trainer, training folks that are unfamiliar with the system, after years of experience, you understand the complexities within the system and how to get from A to B to C in a timelier fashion. This allows you to conduct the training at a faster level, but still maintain that high level of training that's required in order to do the position.
Can you please explain the level of job training that state worker agencies employees go through to provide the highly qualified service in the UI system and how this training differs from non-merit staffing training?
I will say during the pandemic, I received a minimal amount of training. It was enough to allow me to process claims. Now, with regular merit-based staff, they receive at a minimum of 6 to 8 weeks of training, so that way they're sufficient when they hit the floor and talk with claimants on the phones.
I want to thank the chairman and thank the ranking member for the leaders here.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Mr. Evans. We'll now turn to Ms. Van Dyne, who's a new member of our subcommittee. Welcome, Ms. Van Dyne, and you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's egregious and actually disheartening that in the wake of a global pandemic that disrupted the lives of millions, we all saw it, that forced thousands of small businesses to close their doors and robbed millions of Americans of their loved ones, bad actors and international criminal gangs would seek to take advantage of good faith efforts to help those negatively impacted by a once-in-a-lifetime tragedy. The GAO estimates that pandemic unemployment fraud may be as much as $135 billion, with some estimates even higher. And I think it's vital that Congress act so that prosecutors have the opportunity to track down and to hold these criminals accountable. But this committee also has a responsibility to ensure proper oversight and administration of the UI program as a whole. Mr. Talcove, government officials, state employees, and contractors routinely participate in insider UI fraud. And states either ignore the problem or they try to infer that embezzlement is not an issue with state employees. This problem is often overlooked by government officials, as in Delaware, for example, where the Public Integrity Commission refused to investigate a Delaware Department of Labor employee who was embezzling money directly from the state's unemployment trust fund. Can you please speak about your experience regarding insider UI fraud, and is it being taken seriously by government officials?
I would say of the $250 billion that was stolen from unemployment insurance, I would say approximately 10% or $25 billion was insiders. Wow. And what the insiders were doing was they were, in some cases, selling their access to some of these same criminal groups that you mentioned from China, Russia, Nigeria, and Romania. They were selling their access to gangs, or, which I think is worse, is they were stealing from the very people that they were trying to serve. And you have to have oversight and you have to have auditing in those programs. And it wasn't just in Delaware. I mean, I think it happened in 20 plus states. And the other point that I would make is, unfortunately, it's still happening today. And it's just not in the unemployment insurance program. It's in the SNAP program. It's in virtually all the programs across the country. Now, last point, 99.9% of those workers, they're really good people. Yeah. They show up every day and they do the right thing. It's a very small percent, but they give everybody a bad name.
And I appreciate that. I'm also with Aaron Bean on the Small Business Committee, and this is my 5th year on that committee, and we've talked to small businesses who during this time have seen, benefits that they should have received, not because that was given out to fraudsters and in criminals, and the complete lack during the last administration of holding these people accountable or providing oversight. Ms. Huey, in your written testimony, you quoted a national study published in August of 2020 by the University of Chicago entitled U.S. Unemployment Insurance Replacement Rates During the Pandemic. You stated that the median percentage of salary replaced by unemployment during the pandemic was 145%. It was more than 200% for workers in the bottom 20% of the U.S. income spectrum and more than 300% for workers in the bottom 10%. This compares with a typical pre-CARES Act salary replacement rate of only 40 to 50% of lost income. In plain English, we are paying people a lot of money to stay home rather than to go to work, and the disaster effects of this policy are still being felt today. And according to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, workforce population remains below pre-pandemic levels, and we are missing out 1.7 million Americans from the workforce compared to February of 2020. Can you please speak on the disastrous effects of paying people unemployment benefits that were double or triple their salary before the COVID-19 pandemic, and why this must never happen again during any type of economic downturn in the future?
Certainly, the American people are so generous in making sure that their fellow Americans get support during these times of emergencies, right? And so I think one of the things that we saw that was a major motivation for this type of fraud was the federal pandemic unemployment compensation plus up. So most states have a regular weekly benefit amount. In Missouri, the maximum benefit that you can get is $320 a week. And again, that's based on what your income was and what your credits are into the trust fund from the employers that have paid in. Now, when you then add $600 on top of that, you are definitely putting a huge multiplier on it, right? And so it then, and that during the 2008, 2009 crisis, that plus up actually was $25. So you would have your weekly benefit at the state level and then a $25 plus up. But in 2020, we raised it to $600. And we needed a flat number. There were a lot of states that had legacy systems, and they could replace that $25 number with another flat number, but they couldn't prorate it. So that was one thing. But the choice of $600 absolutely was like the spark that really generated the attention of fraudsters to get in. You just had to have some successful hits to it. In each state, you can have multiple states that you file in, just a few weeks, and you can get quite a few thousands of dollars. So
My
again,
time has expired. I appreciate your
problem.
answer. I need to yield back, but thank you all very much for your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Van Dyne. I now recognize Mr. Gomez of California.
Let me be clear, Democrats and Republicans both say that there's no place for fraud. Democrats, it's because it undermines people's faith that government is actually doing the job that they're supposed to do. And I think that's a big deal. And also, I appreciate the gentleman from Florida mentioning that there was fraud in a Republican-run state, and it's not just the Democratic states that had the problem. And also, one of the biggest ways that fraud happens is through weak security measures that leave people's personal information vulnerable. Mr. Meyenburg, what kind of training do state worker agency employees receive to ensure that they are protecting personal information?
Yes, it's at least 6 to 8 weeks worth of training with a heavy emphasis on protecting identity information and all personally identifiable information.
Social security numbers, birthdays,
Yes.
accounts, anything that can say this person is associated with this, this information is associated with that individual.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's, I want a bureaucrat to be just a pain in the ass. I want them to oh, you don't have the proper information, rejected it. Oh, you want to access this information? You need this form, you need this clearance, you need this kind of training. You don't? Too bad, you can't have it. And but something that's going on now at the federal level is when it comes to Secretary Bessent and President Trump. I don't think Secretary President or President Trump made sure Elon Musk got that kind of training, or any training that, for that matter, before all of our personal data was turned over to him. How can, I want my friends on the other side of the aisle to see this as a big, big issue. Because if there's nothing there being a check, this is becoming the largest fraud and scam of our government when it comes to personal information in our history. This is at a time when people are struggling with skyrocketing rent, when grocery prices are through the roof, and when child care costs are out of control. What are Donald Trump and Secretary Bessent doing? They give Elon Musk, an unelected, unconfirmed, untrained, special, quote unquote, special government employee, and the rest of his tech bros access to every American's sensitive and personal financial information. They have access to our bank accounts, to your bank accounts. If you file taxes electronically, you paid your taxes, you've received payments, they have access to all your accounts. You know, we need to do something to address that. And it doesn't matter where they have access to everybody's information. If you live in Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, California, and that is risking a massive personal data leak that lead to identity theft on an unprecedented scale. I had my identity stolen, so I know how painful it is to have to prove who you are and to get your money back, and to make sure that you're not going into debt. Improper disclosure of taxpayer information is considered a felony under Section 6103, punishable up to 5 years in prison, as well as $5,000 fine. And that's just for one instance of improper tax disclosure. What's the punishment for every single American? That's the scale of this potential fraud and breach of information. Is Secretary Bessent's careless disregard for our most sensitive personal information worthy of articles of impeachment? I don't know yet, because they refuse to hand over any information of what occurred in the last several days. But this is a serious, unprecedented situation. Secretary Bessent needs to come before this committee and answer questions and violating the people's trust, but also when it comes to their personal information. We can't stand for it. Fraud is fraud, no matter who does it. Is it a public employee? Is it a criminal enterprise? Or even if it's the Secretary of the Treasury himself. We need to stop it, and we need answers now. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Gomez. Now recognize the gentleman from Northwest Iowa, Mr. Feenstra.
Thank you, Chairman, and I want to thank the witnesses for being here. I enjoyed reading your testimony and also listening to it. And I just want to remind everybody that all bureaucrats are not elected. That's just common sense. We're here to create solutions. We're here to understand the problems and then create solutions. And Mr. Ficke, that's what I want to talk about. I was impressed by reading your testimony. I know you're not a law enforcement officer, but you have 30 years of experience in the financial services industry. And generally, unemployment insurance is prosecuted using federal banking laws, including mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, aggravated identity theft, money laundering. So considering your time in financial services and working with the state of Ohio, are these banking offenses the right charges for individuals with unemployment insurance fraud? What is your thoughts there?
Well, first of all, thank you for the question. In my previous testimony, I've actually stated a few times that I think it's very important to look at collaboration of data and information between what's available in the private sector and what's available in the benefits applications and submissions and those types of things are going with it. I think the prosecution of those criminals is extremely important, and we've talked about the number of cases. I think it's really important to focus on the magnitude of individual cases and looking at the impact that those can have on the overall collection and recovery of those funds.
Yeah. Do you think we should figure out better ways, though, instead of using the financial service industry? Is there a better way to prosecute these crimes under something different than banking regulatory regulations?
Well, I think in my experience, especially with the Attorney General's offices and the collaboration that happened in Ohio, a lot of it was driven and supported by the amount of information sharing that happened between, and as Mr. Talcove has pointed out a few times, this is not limited to unemployment insurance. This goes across SNAP and multiple other programs. I think it's important when we looked at the guidelines from a private supporter of our state.
Yep.
When we looked at the guidelines, what we were able to do, it was our role, as the agency's role, to actually identify that a case had to be prosecuted, but then to turn that over to the appropriate organizations.
So you were in the state of Ohio. I was in the state of Iowa. I was a state senator, had a chair of Ways and Means at that point, and really the states are the ones that handle all the unemployment insurance issues. And here's a situation, obviously, through COVID that we gave a lot of dollars and stuff like that. How can us, as the states, what can the federal government do to help the states with fraud issues? And then I think I'm moving forward and saying, all right, what happens if we have a situation like this again? How can we be proactive in trying to find solutions to mitigate some of these issues?
Well, thank you for the question. I think my first thing that comes to mind for me is sustainability. There have been very strong measures put in place during the crisis. The support to actually encourage and enable the states to actually keep those in place, I think, are going to be a really important part in the overall success. The other one is and I've said this a few times, is collaboration, not only from a data perspective, but best practices that have taken place in multiple private sector organizations.
And using each state. So Ohio might have a great way of doing it. I mean, we should be collaborative across state lines, figuring out what's best. What are the best practices?
Yeah, a very good example of that is the reality that one false account in a financial institution could be used across multiple states.
Yep.
And today, an individual state has a harder time recognizing some of those trends.
Mr. Talcove, can you talk about that a little bit? Making sure that moving forward, our state systems are prepared for these unemployment spikes and you know these stealing of billions of dollars, and what the states can do collaboratively with the federal government.
Yeah, so I mean, I want to make the first point. I was out in California this week, LA.
Yep.
And the same criminal groups that
heard that.
stole from
Yes.
the unemployment insurance
We're doing the same thing
program
with fire.
are now stealing from the disaster.
So that should be a clue to us, right?
Right. We haven't fixed it.
Yes.
Right? And it really starts with those three things that I talked about, right? It's the front-end identity verification.
Yep.
It's no self-reporting, and it's managing that back-end population. And it's frustrating because there's people in California who need those benefits that are going to wake up one
not have
day,
them. Yep.
and they're going to see that someone put a loan against their house because they got an SBA loan for $500,000.
Great point. My time is up, but thank you. We're in this together. As states and federal government, we are together in this and try to figure out solutions. Thank you, Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Feenstra. I recognize Mr. Horsford of Nevada.
Thank you, Chairman LaHood, and to Ranking Member Davis for holding this hearing and for the courtesy of allowing members to wave on. I'd also like to just talk about the importance, as we are, about rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse and protecting American taxpayers, but also we really need to provide some answers to our constituents based on the immediate issue that they're facing. The largest illegal data breach is happening right now in U.S. history at this administration's direction, and we still don't know who's in charge or what they're up to, where this information is being used, or how widespread it is. So I really wish that this was the focus of today's hearing, since this is what the majority of my constituents are calling me about today. I'd also like to talk about what we're doing to prevent Elon Musk and the hackers who are involved with potentially slowing down people's tax refunds, their federal payments, and their hard-earned benefits. That is what people want to know. Less than a year ago, Chairman Smith introduced legislation meant to increase the maximum penalty for the unauthorized disclosure of returns and return information. And I agree with Chairman Smith when he stated that Congress must not tolerate the theft and leak of taxpayer information. So why aren't we doing something about it? Since we have the largest illegal data breach in U.S. history taking place right now under this administration's watch. Now, turning back to the issue of this hearing, I actually introduced back in August of 2022 the GUARD Act, the Guaranteeing Unemployment Assistance and Reducing Deception Act. My bill enables aggressive action to recover pandemic unemployment benefits that were paid to criminal cartels by supporting prosecution of ringleaders and helping victims of fraud. The bill would also seek to provide workers who were victims of identity theft with help to quickly resolve any remaining issues. My district has no shortage of identity theft cases. That's why I'm concerned with this illegal data breach that's happening right now. But between 2020 and 2023, we saw a 63% increase in the metro Las Vegas area alone of identity theft cases. I know this issue because my constituents know this issue. So I was pleased to see that we would be addressing a recommendation by the Department of Labor Inspector General to extend the statute of limitations for pandemic unemployment insurance fraud. Unfortunately, last week, President Trump fired that AG, the one who made the recommendation that we're all discussing in this hearing, the one who makes this hearing relevant. So now the IG is gone. The majority is holding this hearing anyway with 2 contractors, but not one single public employee who investigates and prosecutes fraud. My constituents want to know what we're doing about these issues, Mr. Chairman. So I suggest that as a committee, we focus on those priorities and to make sure that they're being addressed. If I could go to the witness, the minority witness, to understand, would providing measures like the Guaranteeing Unemployment Assistance and Reducing Deception Act, the GUARD Act, help address protecting the victims of fraud from identity theft?
I don't know all of the details that go in with the GUARD Act, but I do think that there's always more we can do to protect not only ourselves, our loved ones, our neighbors, our families, all of that. So I do believe there's more that we can do, absolutely.
Do you agree that having an inspector general who oversees protecting taxpayers is an important function?
Absolutely.
And that person being fired is preventing that protection being in place at this time?
Absolutely.
So, Mr. Chairman, why aren't we addressing that today? I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Horsford, for your questions. That concludes our questions from committee members here today. Let me just again acknowledge your statements today, your testimony today, answering our questions. We appreciate your expertise, your experiences, your suggestions. Very, very helpful here today. And to lay the context for what we need to do between now and March 27th, which is to extend the statute of limitations on this for taxpayers and for this particular program. And so I look forward to working collaboratively, look forward to working in a bipartisan way with my colleagues to get that done on behalf of the taxpayers of the United States. So with that, I'll advise members that they have 2 weeks to submit written questions to be answered later in writing. Those questions and your answers will be made part of the formal record. With that, the committee stands adjourned. Thank you.